What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So today just browsing YouTube, and if you are a motorcyclist or a biker or anything like that, and you've been around the motorcycle YouTube community, you may have noticed that a fairly discussed topic in the motorcycling community on YouTube is whether or not you should buy a 600 for your first motorcycle. So this is my motorcycle here. This is a Honda. This is my second bike, not my first one. So I was just thought about giving my opinion, since I've ridden a 600 and a 250 and a 300. So I don't know, I just thought I threw my 2 cents in there. But I'm gonna try to keep it brief and sort of just go over some of the pros and cons about starting off on a 600 versus starting off on a 250. So let's go and talk about my biases first, because like I said, I started off on a Ninja 250, and I'll throw up a picture of it. You can see right there. So I started off with a Ninja 250, and I rode that around for about a year before I upgraded to this one. Now, I took the motorcycle course. I took the MSF, and so I completed that course, and that was on a 300. I was on like a Suzuki, I think. I can't remember. It was one of those beginner bikes. But that sort of segues into why they're called beginner bikes, and that's because they have a smaller CC, smaller displacement. So CCs, of course, is cubic centimeters. That's the displacement, and that's generally how we measure power on a motorcycle. Now, it's important to note that on a sport bike and on other different types of bikes, CCs can mean different things. On sport bikes particularly, cubic centimeters can correlate pretty directly with power. But if you're talking about a really large displacement Harley, for example, that won't really relate one for one to speed. A lot of Harley riders like huge displacement motors because they're really smooth. They have great sound. It's all around really good for a cruiser. But for a sport bike like this one, you're probably going to be talking about CCs in terms of just pure speed. So that's CCs. And so before you're even thinking about CCs, you should think about what kind of motorcycle you want in the first place. There's a lot of different types of motorcycles, and I throw up a few images of the different types of motorcycles here. But for this video, I'm going to be talking specifically about sport bikes, because like I said, the displacement for the engine in CCs can correlate pretty directly to speed. So when it comes to sport bikes, the jump between a 250cc motorcycle and a 600 motorcycle, it's pretty large, honestly. Now if we're talking about, I think most motorcycles now are 300s, and even some beginner motorcycles are getting up to the 400s and 450s I've seen. But basically, there's 3 separations of motorcycle, which is the 300, the smallest, the 600, the mid-class, and then the 1000, which will be the largest one, the largest category. Generally speaking, of course, there are 250s, there's 350s, there's 400s, there's 650s, there's 900s. So when we're talking about sport bikes, we want to look at a few categories that you are wanting to consider when getting a beginner bike, when getting your first bike. So you're going to want to consider, of course, ease of use. So how easily can you ride a motorcycle? maintenance, how complicated is it to work on the motorcycle, and speed. Of course, that's sort of the main one, most important one, which is speed. Ergonomics can be thrown into number one, like the first thing as well. Ergonomics is how well the motorcycle is sort of, I guess, designed for the user, you know what I mean? So, you know, an ergonomic motorcycle will be very simple to use. It's going to feel nice when you are holding onto the handlebars. It's going to feel nice to sit on. It's going to be comfortable. So things like that. So, of course, when we're talking about 600s versus 300s, and we'll be sticking to 300s and 600 categories because a lot of people, that's sort of where the main debate is. I really don't recommend starting on a 1000. Okay, so let's sort of get into that, right? So why do people say, I recommend starting with a 600 or I recommend starting with a 300? That's a great question. And the main reason a lot of people say don't start on a 600 is because, unfortunately, guys, it's hard to ride, okay? It can be difficult to ride a 600. This one is an old one, so it's a little bit more forgiving, but it's still going to be pretty difficult. If we're talking about, you know, ease of use, which again was our number one category, remember, 300, is it going to be easier to use? Okay, it's going to be more comfortable. So first and foremost, seat height, right? Seat height is very important. Now, when I sit on this bike, you know, I can pretty much touch the ground with both my feet. I'm flat footing it, but I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm 5'11". So, I mean, I'm 6 foot. I'm 6 foot. But yeah, so believe it or not, that is actually, you know, very important because a lot of people get on an adventure bike at the dealership, for example, and they can't touch the ground, and it's a little intimidating. So it may seem trivial, but it is pretty important. So a 250 and 300s are going to be smaller engines, so the frame of the motorcycle is going to be smaller, the tires are going to be smaller, the brakes are going to be smaller, the seat height is going to be shorter, the pegs are going to be more forward, so you'll be in a more upright position, and that is generally more comfortable. And if you're comfortable and your motorcycle is, you know, relatively easy to operate, then you're going to have fun. And of course, we want to have fun on the motorcycle. Like that's you know, that's one of the goals that we want to have. We want to enjoy the motorcycle. So a 600 is less forgiving. That means that the clutch is more finicky. It needs more finesse when you're operating the motorcycle. The throttle is more sensitive, which means that every little movement of your wrist is going to directly affect, you know, your speed on the motorcycle, the handling of the motorcycle. Your brakes, of course, don't even forget about the brakes. They're so sensitive on a 600 and 1000s. So that's what people say when people say, you know, the 600s are more unforgiving. That's what they mean, and it is true in a lot of comparisons between 600s and 300s. So that's one of the biggest downsides to starting on a 600, because that unfortunately can affect how you learn to ride the motorcycle. So another argument for people wanting to start on 300s is because when you start on a 300, like I said, everything is generally smaller, you're slower, and you learn a lot better at speeds more manageable for a beginner. Basically, that's the gist of the argument. Now, here's one of the arguments that I think are very valid, and that is that when you start on a 250 or when you start on a 300, you are going to get bored quick. And so that's sort of how the argument goes, right? You're gonna lose, you know, you're gonna get used to the power quickly. And you know, man, unfortunately that's true. I lasted a year on my 250, but yeah, I was bored of it probably 3 months in, I would say 3 months in, I was just getting tired of the power. It was yeah, it was just too slow for me. And one of the biggest things was highway speeds, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But that is true. Unfortunately, a 250 smaller bike, it's going to be a lot slower, and you're going to have a harder time on the freeway if that's something that you do. If you commute very often on the freeway, the 250 or 300 is probably not the choice for you. But that's generally how people make that argument. You're going to be bored of it. So again, I guess I've never actually stated what I think, but yeah, I think that you should start on a 300 or a 250 simply because that learning curve. So again, mainly for the reasons that I already stated in this video. So number one, you're gonna be having a lot more fun on a 250 or a 300 when you're first starting out, because honestly, it's not that slow, especially when you're starting out. You know, you're sitting right here on the bike, you know what I mean? So you're sitting and the concrete is right there. You know what I mean? The street is flying past you at 40 miles an hour and you feel like you're going 60 or 70. So it's right there, you know what I mean? So I think the speed is totally fine, and I think that it's just a way more enjoyable time to learn all the sort of ins and outs of your motorcycle. Another great pro to starting off on a 300 is, since the engine is smaller, the brakes are smaller, you know, the chain is smaller, the tires are smaller, everything is generally less complicated to work on. And that's a great thing. If you learn how to do all the maintenance on your motorcycle, that is so awesome. And really, I think anybody could learn how to do the maintenance on their motorcycle. When it comes to, you know, look how complicated the spark plugs are to get to here. I mean, I have to, obviously this piece is broken on my motorcycle, but I'd have to take this off, and then I'd have to jangle with the radiator, and then try to get this out, and then clean it. And then the carburetors are a hassle to get to, and then the brakes are big, so there's a lot of fluid, and then, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into maintaining a 600cc. And I think that if you learn how to do all your maintenance on a 300, hopping to a 600 is like it's like no big deal at all. I think that is a great advantage to starting off on a smaller motorcycle. So I think that there are people who get really desensitized to the speed very quickly when they're starting off on a 300, which is totally fine. You know what I mean? That's totally normal. Humans are designed that way. You know, we desensitize to stuff very quickly when we're exposed to it constantly. And if you are on a 250, you'll get very used to the speed. But the good news is that you can find a lot of great 600s for not that much more money than a 250 or a 300. And a lot of 300s actually generally retain a lot of their value, because there's always new riders wanting to get on a sort of old, well, let's be honest, busted motorcycle, because we're probably going to drop it a few times if we're starting out. So that is, you know, a big advantage. You'll buy the bike for, let's say, $2,000, and then you'll sell it for, you know, 15, and that's really not that much of a loss on the secondhand market. So that is another good pro. So yeah, all in all, I think that the biggest discussion around starting off on a 300 and a 600 is, versus a 600, is really the sensitivity of all the controls up here. So again, that's the clutch, that's the brake, the throttle, all that stuff, and the speed desensitization that you'll experience. Honestly, I think that the 300 is totally worth it. you know, you'll probably get used to it anywhere between, you'll definitely get used to the speed within the first 6 months. But I think it'll be very enjoyable experience. As opposed to on a 600, you might start off on a very powerful motorcycle, and you know, every little input that you put in will be magnified to the, you know, like 2x on a 600, because everything is more sensitive on a 600, which is how it's supposed to be. Because if you start in a 300, you learn how to ride a motorcycle, and you learn how to ride a motorcycle very well. Hopping onto a 600 will let you use all the skills that you developed to even greater precision, and you'll be able to ride better. But anyway, guys, that's my opinion. So, you know, let me know what y'all think at the comments down below. Pros and cons of starting off on a 300 versus starting off on a 600. And I'll catch y'all in a different video. Peace.